Hey class, so our next lesson on soils is going to continue where our last left off, which is talking about soil textures. So in our last, we looked at the three primary types of particulates: sand, silt, and clay, that make up the different textures or the different feels of the different kinds of soils. Okay, so sand, silt, and clay is pretty easy and obvious, right? There are three very specific different things. We know at least what clay and sand are like, but obviously there's not just three kinds of soils. Okay, soils are based on how much sand, how much silt, and how much clay that soil has. And so that's what we're going to examine and learn how to calculate in today's lesson. So this is the soil texture triangle. The soil texture triangle is how we examine what kind of soil we have based on the percent of each different type of particulate. So based on how much sand, how much silt, and how much clay is in that soil, we can find out what kind of soil it is. So how do we use this? Okay, we start with any one of our three particulates and the percent that we have of it. And we'll look at how to calculate percents a little bit later because that's going to be tied to your lab you've been working on and prepping for. So let's say we start with our sand. Okay, sand is located along the bottom. See if I can get this to go away and stay away again. So sand is located along the bottom. And you can see that when you look at the numbers, no, it won't go away. We'll just leave it. That's fine. When you look at the numbers, they're tilted. The tilt of the numbers tells you which of the lots of lines in the center you should follow. So because these letters are tilted, or excuse me, these numbers are tilted this way, sand percentages are going to follow the line that's also tilted in that direction. So let's say that we had a soil sample that had 30% sand. Okay, so it's going to be somewhere located along this line, which means it could either be a silt loam, a loam, a clay loam, or it could be a clay. Okay, so that's going to be our sand percent. So it's 30% sand. Let's say that it's 30% clay as well. So if I go to the clay side, I'll notice that these numbers are all written normally, which means that we're going to follow the horizontal lines straight across. So we have 30% sand. We said we also have 30% clay. I'm going to follow that line along until it intersects with the 30%. I think it's right here, the 30% sand line. Okay. Last but not least, that means that we should have 40% of our last thing, which is silt. The silt line, as you can see, the numbers are tipped this way. So I'm going to follow this line down to where it would intersect with the others. Based on my information, it looks like I have a clay loam. Okay. Quick pro tip as you're calculating: if your percent sand, percent clay, and percent silt don't add up to 100, there is a mistake somewhere because you can't really have more than 100% soil unless you round it, in which case you might have a little bit more. But that's when we're calculating. Okay. So this is the soil texture triangle. This is what we use in order to calculate out what exact kind of soil we have. Why is that important? Because different soils are used for different things. So, for example, uh, potatoes, which is what we have pictured here, do better in soils with more sand. Anything that grows and we grows its root system out, which is what tomatoes are, potatoes are. Excuse me. Potatoes are a root structure. That's what part of the plant potatoes come from. Because they grow underground and they're those enlarged roots, they need soil that's really easy to grow and expand in. And sandier soils that have more aeration also make it easier for those roots to expand. Okay? But that's not true of every crop. Not every crop wants a sandier soil. Some crops need soils with better structure. Some plants just need soils with better structures. For example, trees don't do well in super sandy soils because sandy soils don't have enough strength to support all of the weight of that top heavy tree. We also don't tend to build homes or buildings on really sandy soils if we can avoid it because they're not really strong foundations. Soils with higher clay are better for growing, or excuse me, for building on. So different soils, depending on their type, are better for different things. Okay, as we study and we examine what kind of soil we have, It can help us make decisions about how best to provide water for plants, what kind of nutrients might be lacking because they just can't be held in the soil. Lots of different things we can learn by knowing what kind of soil type we have. And then we can make adjustments to be able to grow the crops we need or provide the food for animals we need or build the structures we want to have in that space. So, this version of the soil texture triangle, I find just a little bit easier for calculating because there's not so many of the colors to get distracted with. And it only has the 10% lines. And I think that's a little bit easier to follow than all of the like intermediary 5% lines. You like the colored one better, by all means, use that one. Okay. But we're going to use this one to calculate out some soil textures. So in this first example, we have a soil that's 40% sand, 22% clay, and 38% silt. And we want to know what kind of soil, excuse me, it is. So if you can kind of go along with your finger and remember where spots are, awesome. You can do that. That's quicker, faster. But if like me, you need to like actually have lines in there to remember where you last were, I'm going to show you a really easy tool on your computer that you can use. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of my presentation. And I'm going to click on this soil texture triangle, and then I'm going to right click so that I get the options menu, and I want to copy. You can also, if you don't know, hit the Control and the C button on your computer when it's highlighted like this, and that will copy it as well. That's called a quick key. Then I'm going to go into my Google Drive, and I'm going to hit this New button. And if you've never used it before, under the More Options menu, there's something called Google Drawings. You want to go ahead and open up a new drawing. And then I want to paste in my soil texture triangle. You can do this again in one of two ways. You can right click to where it says paste, or you can hit Control and V. And that's going to bring my soil texture triangle up. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so it's easier for us to see. Okay. And then I'm going to be using the line tool to insert some straight lines where my different percentages are. So if I go back to my PowerPoint, it says that the soil sample I'm going to use is 40% sand. So I'm going to start with the 40% sand on the bottom. Again, I'm going to select my line because I lost it when I navigated away. And I'm going to put a line right over 40% sand. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the color feature. So once I have my line in, I can actually change its width and its color to make it a little easier to see. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to make it red because I like the color red. And I'm going to change the width to 4 points just because that makes it a lot easier to see on my chart. And as you can see, I accidentally added another line. Okay, so now I have my 40% sand line in. Next thing, it says we've got about 22% clay. So if I go to my clay section, okay, those are my lines going straight over. I'm going to select line again. I'm going to go to clay 20%. 22 is going to be a little bit above. Okay, this isn't going to obviously be perfect when you're calculating or trying to estimate in between numbers. Do your best. You're going to get close enough to the right intersection to be able to figure out what your soil type is. So I'm going to drop in a line at somewhere around 22. Okay. And then once again, I'm going to go and I'm going to make it red. Actually, I might make it orange this time so I have different colors for all of them, a little easier to see. And then I'm going to increase my line weight to 4 so it's a little more obvious about where that line is. Okay. So I have my 2 in. Technically, this intersection is enough information to know that I have a loam sand or loam soil, but I want to be thorough. I want to double check and make sure I didn't make a mistake somewhere. So I'm also going to check my last line, which is 38% silt. So I'm going to go click my line on again. I'm going to go to my silt. It follows this angle. I've got my 30, I've got my 40. I'm going to be much closer to my 40 than my 30 with 38%. So I'm going to draw in my line. Again, it's not perfect. They don't all intersect perfectly, but it's close enough. I'm going to up my weight. I'm going to change it. Let's do a nice green right here. Okay. And then if I take a look, okay, I've got my section, my area where they all intersect. As I said, it might not be perfect because you're kind of estimating, but you're going to get close enough to know that, yep, this is a loam soil. Okay? So something that's 40% sand, 22% clay, 38% silt, I would go ahead and say, yep, that's classified as a loam. Okay? Loam is the term we use for soil that's a basically perfect balance of all three texture types, and really is going to provide the best quality for growing almost any crop. Okay, it's got water retention from the silt and the clay. It's got aeration from the sand. It has the ability to hold nutrients that clay has. It's really the overall best type to use for basically any crop. So let's try this again. We've got another question. So 60% sand, 10% clay, 30% silt. I'm just going to hit the back button until all of my lines are gone. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing. So 60% sand. So if I go to my sand, I like when they're on nice lines. It makes my life a lot easier. So 60% sand, make it red, make it a little wider. Okay, it is 10% clay. So I'm going to go to my clay line. I'm going to draw it in. Again, even my lines are not perfectly on the lines when I have them, but it's close enough. Okay, and then I've got 30% silt. So I go over to silt. I drop in 30% line. And look at that. I've got a nice, easy, obvious, I have a sandy loam. If I'm going too fast, this is a video, guys, go back, rewatch. Okay. We did the first one really step by step. Second one, I went a little bit faster. Okay. Feel free to go back and watch if you need to. It's not a big deal. Okay. Use your resources. If you have questions, ask me. Feel free to pop into office hours. I will gladly, we can go through a couple of these together if that makes it easier. Not a problem. I'm here to help. Okay. It is obviously much easier when we have little square pieces of paper and we can do them in the classroom together. But okay, Google Drawings works pretty well to get us where we need to go. Okay, our next question. What if we try this in reverse? So what proportions of each particle might be in a sample of silty clay? So I'm gonna get rid of those. Okay, I'm looking for silty clay. I see silty clay right here. So there's lots of different answers you can get for this question. Okay, anything in the silty clay region is going to work. But remember, you can't have more than 100% soil. So if I ask you a question of what's an example of the breakdown you could have of sand, silt, and clay for a soil, you need to pick a specific spot. So let's say that I'm gonna go ahead and put in a line. And let's say that I want this to be 50%. Oh, let's try and make it nice and even. I want it to be 50% silt. I'm gonna start with silt because it's a silty clay. So I'm gonna color my line. I'm gonna make it a little bit wider. Okay, so it's gonna be that 50% silt. Okay, and then let's say that I want it to be, if I go over to clay, I want it to be 45% clay, because 45 intersects really easily and well. Okay, so then the last thing I need to do is figure out how much sand it is. So I can do this mathematically. If I take 100% of something, I take away the 50% silt, I take away the 45% clay. What I have left is going to be 5% of sand. Again, my lines don't intersect perfectly, but that's fine. So that would be an example. I could have 50% silt, 45% clay, and 5% sand, and that would give me a silty clay. So I said 50% silt, 45% clay, right? Yep. And 5% sand. And that's going to give me a silty clay. All right. So challenge yourself. Here's a little opportunity for some practice. I have 3 different questions. I'm going to ask you to pause the video now and try these out. Okay, you've got a sample that's 30% sand, 50% clay, 20% silt. You have a sample that's 10% sand, 20% clay, and 70% silt. And then what are the potential proportions for loamy sand? Okay, so take a minute, pause the video, try them out, and then play the video again because next we're going to check your answers. Okay. I'm assuming if you're still listening, you've already tried. Let's go through the answers to these. So for the first one, if it's 30% sand, 50% clay, and 20% silt, it's going to be classified as a clay soil. You'll notice on the soil texture triangle that there is a large section that is considered clay. It's the biggest section of a soil type relative to the other percentages. Clay is really overwhelming in soil because of how it all sticks together. And so even if you've got, 50% other stuff, that clay kind of wins them out and all binds it together. So we still consider that a clay. Number two, 10% sand, 20% clay, and 70% silt was a silt loam. And then your proportions for your loamy sand can vary, but remember, whatever ones you use within these windows, they need to add up to 100%. So I couldn't say that my soil was 90% sand and 30% silt and 15% clay because that's way more than 100. But I could have numbers in between each of these. So it could be 75% sand and 10% silt and 15% clay because that equals my 100%. Okay? So hopefully those made sense. Hopefully you got a little bit of practice. The next thing that we're going to talk about is how do we analyze our soil samples? Okay. So obviously, like you can't just look at a soil and know, oh, well, that's clearly 10% clay just by looking at it. So we have to analyze our soils to find those percentages in the first place. And then we can use those percentages to determine our soil types. And that's what you're going to be doing next in your soil lab. Okay, you should have at this point done the soil texture by feel. That's an informal way to kind of check based on characteristics and qualities that it has, but there's certainly a more scientific and precise way to do that, and that's what we're doing next. So you were supposed to take your soil sample, clear and prep it out, put it in some kind of container. Mason jars are really easy, but any clear container where you could see layers, levels, see like the different colors of your soil, mix it with a bunch of water, and then give it a really good shake so that everything was incorporated, right? Then you're supposed to let it sit. Okay. And sitting, if you've done a really good job shaking everything up and you've broken down those pieces and you've let your soil sample dry for a little while, what you should get are some different layers in your sample. And if you really don't have them, it's okay to give it another really good shake and let it sit again for another day and just come back. Okay. Everything we're doing, you kind of work at your pace. It's okay if this is a day after. Good lines are going to make it easier for you to solve. So here we have two different soil samples, and you can kind of see when you look at them that there's a distinction in what this looks like versus what this looks like versus what this looks like, those different levels. Okay? Those are your different primary particulates. You can see them over here, the different like mineral content, different organic matter content. But again, you can see like there's a difference between this gravelly bit, this slightly smoother bit, and then this really fine clay layer on the top. Okay. So you're going to use those layers to calculate out what kind of soil sample you have. Again, if you don't have really clear layers, like this is a really good example of something where you can see the colors and like the different textures really well, like sand versus silt versus clay. But you can also see that there's not a huge distinction. There's not really good layers because this wasn't shaken very well. It just settled weird. It might have got bumped. Just shake it up again. Give it another chance. It doesn't have to be perfect, but like this line difference is really hard to like estimate kind of in the middle. Okay. So check for good lines. And then if you don't have good lines, shake it up, move on, try your lab again another day. Okay. And that's the next lesson is going to be your lab activity. So I'm going to use this soil jar sample. Okay. I've kind of got it divided into your sand versus your silt versus your clay, kind of where those textures / colors change a little bit. It continues to be gritty right up until about here. and then you've got your very distinct change between silt and clay. Okay? You're going to need a measuring utensil for this. It doesn't matter what kind, it doesn't matter what scale. I think millimeters are the easiest, not a requirement. Um, if you don't have any measuring utensils at home, like you could make your own. You could use something on your computer, kind of like what I'm doing. I just took pictures, and then I found on Google a ruler. Okay, this is probably not to actual scale. Like I don't think this is actually, but actually it might be, but it doesn't have to be to scale as long as your line spacing is even. Okay. Your overall goal is that you just want to find out how much you have of each different thing and how much you have total. So when I put this ruler up to my soil sample, okay, I'm going to use the millimeters lines because it's a lot easier to get more precise numbers. But it looks like I have about 85 lines worth of soil sample total from the bottom all the way up to the top. So 85 is going to be my total number. Now I also need to know how much I have of each different particulate. So starting at 0 and going up to where my silt line is, I'm going to say that that's at about 57. So this is 50, okay? 5 centimeters is 50 millimeters. This is 55, and I think I'm about 2 lines up. So I'm at about 57 milliliters or 57 lines worth of sand, okay? So I would go ahead and note that somewhere. I've got it on my next slide. Then I want to look at silt. So silt is going to go the next 1, 2, 3 to 60. And then that's another 10. So that's 13. And then it's another 10 to the 8 line. So that's going to give me 23 lines of silt. And then my last about 5 from the 8 to this middle line, which is 5 littles. That's going to give me about 5 milliliters or 5 lines worth of clay. Okay. So I have 57 for sand, I have 23 for silt, and I have 5 for clay. And if I added those all up, it should give me what I said was my total, which is 85. Okay. Again, things to note. It doesn't matter what scale you use, if you use inches, the lines on the inches, whatever works for you, whatever you have available. If you don't have anything available, take a picture, put it on your Google drawing tool again, and then go grab yourself a ruler off of Google. That's literally what I did for this. Okay, so that I could show it to you. So super easy. So to find our percents, what we do then is we take the number of lines for that individual like texture, okay, and we divide it by the total number of lines. That's going to give us a decimal, which we will then multiply by 100 to get the overall percent. So for example, I had 5 lines of clay. I had 85 lines total, so I divide 5 by 85. That gives me 0.0588. I multiply that by 100. It gives me 5.88%. You can totally round. That's okay. I would definitely round this to 6. Okay. I did the same thing for silt. 23 divided by 85, multiply that answer by 100, I get about 27%. Sand, 57, 85, I get about 67%. It's, again, okay to round. You are never going to get this precise on your texture triangles. That's okay. Quick note, something I forgot to mention. I told you that this was sand, this was silt, and this was clay. I didn't really explain why. Remember that when we look at our 3 different soil textures, sand is the biggest. Because it's the biggest, it's the heaviest, it's going to sink to the bottom. Clay is the lightest, it's the smallest little individual particles, so it's going to be on the top. So whatever soil sample you have, it's going to be sand, silt, clay, unless you don't have one of those things in your soil, which could happen. Okay. Use your best estimation, kind of look at the color, how fine the particles are to determine which ones you think you have. Right now, this is just about practice and getting the opportunity to like do some stuff. Your answers might not be perfect. I'm okay with that. Okay. I'm not going to be able to see and look at your individual soil sample. So use your best estimation based on what you see. Think about what results you got from your soil texture by feel and think about like, does that make sense? Like if I got to that I had a totally clay soil, maybe I don't have any sand. So Then the next thing I would do is I would take these percentages and I'm going to use them on my soil texture triangle to figure out what my soil type is. So based on what I had for each one, so about 7% clay, about 67% sand, and about 27% silt, based on that, this soil is a sandy loam. Okay, so I've solved it all out. I figured out how to use my soil texture triangles with percents, and I also figured out how to find those percents. This is what soil scientists do, although admittedly they have some fancier equipment sometimes to do that. But this is the basic concept. This is how we started figuring out and determining soil textures, and this is still how a lot of people do it, like without having fancy equipment. Okay, why do we care? I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it's important to understand our soils. We're going to talk a little bit moving forward about the Dust Bowl for a little bit, um, and why that mattered so much then and why we want to continue to be concerned with it now. But understanding our soils lets us use them properly, and it also allows us to understand how to improve our soils. What management practices can we use? What types of fertilizers or herbicides or even machinery is going to be the best to maximize our ability to grow crops or build homes or whatever it is we want to use that soil for, in order to not only get the best out of it now, but also to preserve it, to be able to get the best out of it for the future. Okay? Understanding that lets us have great crops, it lets us have beautiful flowers and fruits to build our homes, etc. Because remember, soils are beautiful and they're life sustaining and we need them, and they are not dirt. Okay? Hopefully, everything made sense. If you have questions, as always, please feel free to contact me. Hope you guys are doing well. I miss you all. And feel free to stay in touch. Take care. Let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, good luck, and I'll talk to you guys later.